the United States is slipping into an unsettling new phase, one that doesn't look like war or an economic meltdown, but something quieter and more alarming. Things are vanishing. In 2025 alone, more than 7,000 grocery and retail locations shut their doors across the country. But the most troubling figure isn't the store count. It's the nearly 30 million Americans now living in food deserts, where the closest full-service supermarket sits 10 to 20 miles away. Imagine waking up one day to find your usual grocery store permanently closed. Prices have jumped by 40%, and suddenly you're forced to drive twice as far just to pick up basic necessities. This situation goes far beyond empty storefronts. It's about seniors, working-class families, and entire small towns being quietly abandoned in the very communities they've called home for decades. What you're about to see isn't a simple breakdown of bankrupt companies. Instead, this is an in-depth look at the 10 largest grocery chains in the United States that have filed for bankruptcy. And more importantly, the real forces that led to each downfall. These are warning signs of a future most people aren't prepared to face. Brace yourself. The real story starts at number 10. A&P, the fall of a grocery giant that lasted 156 years. Some brands are more than just stores. They become emotional landmarks, woven into daily routines and childhood memories. For millions of Americans born before the 1970s, A&P wasn't just a place to shop. It was a sensory experience. Saying the name could almost bring back the scent of fresh bread, the clatter of metal shopping carts, and the reassuring feeling of life in a steadier, more predictable America. That's why the collapse of a company that once operated over 16,000 locations hit so hard. This was a business so influential that Time magazine once labeled it the most important company in America of the 20th century. When A&P filed for bankruptcy, not once but twice, it stopped being just another corporate failure. It became a warning signal for the entire grocery industry. At its core, A&P struggled with a problem many people over 50 recognize all too well: expenses rising far faster than the ability to adjust. Between 2000 and 2010, average urban retail rents climbed nearly 18%. Fuel costs spiked as much as 29% in certain years, sharply increasing transportation expenses, all while grocery profit margins remained painfully thin, usually hovering between just 1 and 2%. When your profit is measured in pennies per dollar, even minor shifts can cause serious damage. What was once a sprawling, unstoppable empire slowly turned into a cumbersome, costly operation that couldn't move fast enough to survive. At the same time, customer habits were quietly changing, especially after the 2008 recession. Middle-income families, the backbone of A&P's customer base, began looking elsewhere. They turned to Walmart for lower prices, Costco for better value in bulk, and Aldi to escape mounting grocery bills. It wasn't about dislike or betrayal. A&P simply cost more, typically 7 to 15% above competitors. And as everyday expenses climbed, Americans were forced to prioritize survival over sentiment. Loyalty couldn't compete with higher electric bills, rising gas prices, medical costs, and relentless inflation. By 2015, the situation had spiraled beyond recovery. Bankruptcy filings revealed more than $2.3 billion in debt. Vendors demanded payment upfront. Store shelves grew bare. Employees who had worked there for decades quietly admitted, "It doesn't feel like it used to." When the final 296 stores closed, the most telling impact wasn't found in spreadsheets. It showed up immediately in neighborhoods across the Northeast. Entire communities became food deserts overnight, not as a theoretical risk, but as a lived reality. In states like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, elderly residents suddenly had to drive 20 or even 30 extra minutes just to buy basic groceries. Nearby small shops lost foot traffic and shut down. Older employees lost jobs and found themselves unable to compete in a modern hiring market that had little room for them. A&P didn't disappear with a dramatic collapse. It faded away the way so many American institutions do, quietly, one closed store at a time, until people finally realized something deeply familiar was gone for good. What unsettles Americans over 50 isn't simply that a grocery chain failed. It's the realization that a 156-year-old powerhouse, once a dominant force nationwide, could still crumble because it couldn't adapt quickly enough to a rapidly changing country. And that uncomfortable reality sets the tone for everything that follows. If even A and P couldn't survive, then the question becomes unavoidable. In 2025, is any grocery chain in America truly safe? Number 9. Fresh and Easy. A case study in what happens when a global powerhouse completely misreads how Americans shop for food. If A and P's collapse felt like the fall of a historic institution, Fresh and Easy was something different, a hard lesson in corporate overconfidence. This was an international retailer convinced it could redesign American grocery habits using spreadsheets, strategy decks, and theory. In 2007, Tesco, then the third largest retailer in the world, made its move into the US market. And they weren't subtle about their plans. The goal was to roll out a sleek, minimalist self-service grocery chain built around British efficiency. Executives believed American shoppers would embrace tidy layouts, ready-made meals, fair pricing, and a grab-what-you-need-and-go experience. On paper, the idea made sense. In real life, it collided headfirst with reality. Within just a few years, nearly every major assumption unraveled. Fresh and Easy opened more than 150 locations across California, Nevada, and Arizona, but customers didn't respond the way Tesco expected. While the company leaned heavily into prepackaged meals, many American shoppers, especially those over 50, wanted something different. For them, buying fresh food meant touching produce, smelling it, and asking questions before making a decision. Shoppers who were used to chatting with staff about meat quality, fruit ripeness, or expiration dates instead walked into stores designed to minimize human interaction. To many customers, that wasn't innovative. It felt cold, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable. So they left. Later, performance data confirmed the disconnect. The average Fresh and Easy store generated only about half the revenue Tesco originally projected. And operational problems made things even worse. The centralized warehouse system Tesco relied on worked well in Europe, but it clashed with the sheer size and distances of the American West. Distribution routes were long and costly, deliveries were slower, spoilage increased, and logistics expenses spiraled out of control, adding hundreds of millions of dollars to operating costs. By 2012, Tesco publicly acknowledged it had lost more than $1 billion on Fresh and Easy alone. It became one of the largest financial failures by a European retailer in U.S. history. But the true reason for the collapse wasn't just financial. Fresh and Easy tried to reprogram how Americans buy food, something deeply tied to routine, trust, culture, and family tradition, using a model designed in corporate boardrooms thousands of miles away. When customers don't trust the brand, don't feel comfortable in the store, and don't see clear value, no amount of sleek design or advanced technology can save a business that's losing money day after day. In 2015, Fresh and Easy filed for bankruptcy for the second time and shut down completely within months. What mattered most, though, was the conclusion many U.S. retail analysts reached afterward. Fresh and Easy didn't fail because it was poorly run. It failed because it misunderstood a basic truth. Buying food isn't a purely logical decision. It's an emotional one. And if a massive corporation that succeeded across Europe could collapse simply by misreading American consumers, then no grocery chain, no matter how large, can assume it's immune to the same fate. Number 8. Dominick's of Chicago. Some disappearances are so quiet that you don't notice them until they've already happened. Dominick's vanished that way, without headlines, without chaos, without warning. One day, the familiar, brightly lit entrances scattered across Chicago were simply gone, replaced by darkened windows and empty glass reflecting the shock felt by people who had built decades of routines around those stores. For Chicago families from the 1970s through the 1990s, Dominick's was never just a grocery stop. It was part of everyday life. The smell of bread baking early in the morning. The same aisles where kids trailed behind their parents. A cornerstone for Italian, Polish, Irish, and other immigrant communities that helped shape the cultural backbone of the Midwest. At its peak, more than 100 locations formed a network most people assumed would always be there. Everything shifted in 1998, the moment Safeway purchased Dominick's. The unraveling didn't begin with customers turning away or with aggressive competition moving in. It started with decisions made far from Chicago by executives who failed to understand that this brand thrived on familiarity, local products, and staff members who knew shoppers by name. Safeway rolled out a standardized national playbook. Staffing levels were cut. Prices crept upward. Locally loved products disappeared. Suppliers changed. Even the natural rhythm of neighborhoods was disrupted, despite decades of loyalty to Dominick's. Chicagoans noticed immediately. The stores no longer felt like their grocery store. They felt like a distant corporate version dropped into the community without permission. The fallout was faster than anyone expected. Within a little more than 10 years, Dominick's lost as much as 40% of its market share. Reports from the Chicago Tribune described emptier aisles, quieter parking lots, and longtime customers drifting toward Jewel Osco, Aldi, or Moreno's, places that still offered a sense of connection and belonging. By 2013, Safeway shut down the entire chain, bringing nearly 95 years of history to an abrupt end. For many Chicago residents, Dominick's wasn't just a brand. It felt like family. What hurt most wasn't the financial failure itself. It was the realization that a piece of Chicago's identity had been erased. Not because the community walked away, but because the brand turned its back on the people who built it. Even today, some neighborhoods still haven't recovered from that loss. And that leaves a lingering question for anyone who has ever called Chicago home. Did you watch Dominick's disappear from your neighborhood? And how did its absence change the pace and feel of daily life? Share your story. These personal memories are often the clearest way to understand how America is quietly shifting. And if you want to keep following these changes, especially those affecting people over 50, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of a landscape that's transforming day by day. Number 7. Marsh Supermarkets of Indiana and Ohio. Some grocery chains disappear because the market moves on. Marsh wasn't one of them. Marsh didn't fall to competition. It was dismantled by the very people entrusted with keeping it alive. For almost 100 years, Marsh served as the backbone of dozens of towns across Indiana and Ohio. Through the 1970s and 1990s, it was where families picked up dinner on Monday nights, where seniors stopped each morning for milk and conversation, and where countless teenagers clocked in for their first job. With nearly 150 locations and tens of thousands of employees, Marsh operated as a steady, dependable system. It didn't just sell groceries. It helped set the daily rhythm of life across the Midwest. Everything began to unravel the moment a private equity firm took control. From that point on, the story followed a pattern America has seen again and again. The new owners viewed Marsh as a financial instrument, not a community-centered business. Cost-cutting became the priority, even when it meant breaking the system itself. Frontline staff were reduced. Fresh food selections were trimmed. Cheaper suppliers replaced trusted ones. Programs designed for seniors, Marsh's most loyal customers, were quietly eliminated. As quality declined, prices rose. Stores that once felt welcoming slowly turned sparse, cold, and impersonal. When service suffered, customers responded. Older adults who depended on familiarity and reliability were the first to stop coming. Cash flow dried up. Inventory sat unsold. Debt climbed quarter after quarter. The signs were unmistakable. Marsh was no longer being guided by people who understood grocery retail, but by spreadsheet calculations made in offices hundreds of miles away. By 2017, Marsh filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company was broken apart and sold off in pieces. Many locations shut down for good, leaving food deserts in areas that had relied on Marsh as their only grocery option. Employees who had dedicated 20 or even 30 years of their lives to the company were laid off with little warning. Entire communities, some with just a single Marsh store, lost their sole access to fresh food. Marsh didn't collapse because customers abandoned it. Marsh collapsed because decisions were made by people who had never walked its aisles. And if you witnessed a Marsh store close in your own town, share your experience. Those personal memories are a vital part of understanding what truly happened to the Midwest during those years. Number 6. Family Dollar. Some corporate collapses are caused by crushing debt. Others stem from bad leadership. But what happened to Family Dollar felt less like a financial failure and more like a public health emergency. In 2022, federal inspectors walked into a Family Dollar distribution warehouse in West Memphis, Arkansas. What they discovered stunned not just regulators but the entire retail industry. Inside a facility responsible for storing food, medicine, and everyday necessities for hundreds of southern stores, inspectors found more than 1,000 rats, alive, dead, and decomposing. According to FDA reports, contamination was everywhere. Rat droppings covered packaging. Products were exposed to biological hazards. The verdict was immediate and non-negotiable. 404 stores were ordered to shut down on the spot. No grace period, no appeals. One directive, and hundreds of doors slammed shut overnight. But that disaster was only the breaking point, not the beginning. Family Dollar had already been under serious strain. Operating costs were rising. Competition from Dollar General was intensifying. Supply chain failures were becoming impossible to ignore. Just months after the warehouse shutdowns, another 390-plus locations closed due to ongoing financial losses. For millions of low-income Americans, Family Dollar was far more than a discount retailer. It was where families stretched limited budgets to put together an affordable dinner. It was where seniors bought generic medication they could actually pay for. In towns without a Walmart or any major grocery option, it was a lifeline. When Family Dollar collapsed, entire communities were left stranded. Food deserts expanded overnight. Travel distances to basic necessities doubled or tripled. And, as always, the people hit hardest were those with the fewest alternatives. Family Dollar didn't fail because customers walked away. It failed because a catastrophic breakdown forced the poorest communities to shoulder the consequences. So here's a question worth asking. If you live in an area that has both Dollar General and Family Dollar, what differences stand out to you? And which one truly meets the needs of the people who depend on it most? Share your experience. Stories like yours reveal realities that national headlines often overlook. Number 5. Ultra Foods. Not every grocery chain collapses because it's poorly run. Some fail because they stay too faithful to the very promise that once made them successful. Ultra Foods is a textbook example of that kind of collapse. For years, Ultra Foods was known as a bargain haven for hundreds of thousands of middle and lower-income families across Indiana and Illinois. It was the store where you could load up an entire shopping cart for roughly two-thirds the price of a traditional supermarket, and people built their weekly routines around that guarantee. The company survived on an extremely thin margin strategy, depending on massive customer volume and rapid inventory turnover to stay afloat. But that kind of model only works in a world where costs remain predictable and low. After 2014, that world no longer existed. As fuel prices climbed, transportation expenses surged. When minimum wages increased, Ultra Foods' already paper-thin margins began to tear. As inflation pushed supplier prices higher, Ultra Foods had no room to raise its own prices. Doing so would have driven customers away immediately. Every economic shift hit the same pressure point, a business model that could only survive when everything stayed cheap. While Ultra Foods fought to keep prices frozen, its competitors kept moving forward. Walmart overwhelmed them with sheer scale. Aldi outpaced them with relentlessly low operating costs. Meijer outperformed them with a modern, efficient distribution network. Ultra Foods found itself boxed in, without the flexibility to adapt or the resources to fight back. By 2017, the final store closed. There was no spectacle, no dramatic collapse. Just a discount chain quietly erased by a market where costs rose faster than it could endure. And even today, in an era defined by persistent inflation, Ultra Foods leaves behind an unresolved question. Which ultra-low price model can actually survive long-term? Is it Walmart, Aldi, or an entirely different approach altogether? Your perspective and your comparisons might reveal something about the grocery market that numbers alone can't fully capture. Number 4. Jitney Jungle. Across the American South, very few grocery chains felt as familiar as Jitney Jungle. From Mississippi to Alabama, its presence blended seamlessly into everyday life. The faded green signs, the narrow, welcoming aisles, and the simple weekly shopping trips became part of family memories that stretched back nearly 100 years. But nostalgia didn't determine Jitney Jungle's future. Numbers did. In 1996, the company was acquired through a heavily leveraged financial deal, and from that moment, the decline was set in motion. Debt began piling up faster than sales could grow. Operating expenses surged. The chain was weighed down by aging warehouses, outdated distribution systems, and technology that hadn't kept pace with the modern grocery industry. All of this created a financial pressure cooker. And in a business where profit margins rarely exceed 1 to 2%, there was no room to absorb that kind of strain. While competitors like Walmart, Kroger, and Publix were fine-tuning efficiency down to the last penny, Jitney Jungle found itself stuck, caught between an aging business model and loans tightening like a noose. Just 4 years later, in 2000, the company filed for bankruptcy. Stores were sold off. The brand name disappeared. Nearly a century of history was wiped away. What many people grieved wasn't just the loss of a grocery chain. It was how quietly it vanished. There were no farewells, no moment to reflect, no sense of closure. One day it was there, the next, it wasn't. And that leaves behind a question that still lingers. Did Jitney Jungle truly collapse because of poor management? Or was it simply another local brand that never stood a chance in an era when retail giants grew too powerful for smaller regional chains to survive? That unanswered question continues to echo across the South. Number 3. Pantry pride. Long before Walmart became dominant and before Aldi reshaped discount grocery shopping, the East Coast had its own heavyweight. Pantry pride was widely known as the discount king of the region, and that reputation was earned, not exaggerated. At its height, Pantry Pride operated around 440 stores, placing it among the 5 largest grocery chains in the United States. If you lived in Florida, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania during the 1970s and 1980s, chances are you pushed a cart beneath its unmistakable orange and yellow logo at least once. But no reign lasts forever. Pantry Pride's decline didn't happen overnight. It unfolded through a string of strategic missteps. The company expanded faster than it could manage, took on too much debt, and clung to an aging business model while the rest of the industry evolved at full speed. The grocery landscape was changing rapidly. Supercenters entered the scene. New retail technologies transformed logistics. Modern discount chains arrived with leaner operations and faster inventory turnover. Pantry Pride tried to respond by slashing prices and trimming expenses, but there was little left to cut. Margins were already razor-thin. Debt continued to climb. Stores grew outdated, and longtime customers slowly drifted away. Eventually, bankruptcy became unavoidable. The end came quietly, far removed from the prominence the brand once enjoyed. There was no dramatic collapse, no public spectacle. Just a once-dominant name switching off the lights and fading into history. Today, Pantry Pride exists mainly in the memories of older Americans who once saw it as the East Coast's answer to a national supermarket chain. And it leaves behind a lingering question that still feels relevant. Did Pantry Pride fall simply because the times changed too quickly? Or did it stumble because it slowed down in a race that never truly stops? That uncertainty is part of its legacy. Number 2. Carter's Foods. In small towns across Michigan, the name Carter's Foods once carried the same kind of trust as a longtime family doctor. For nearly 80 years, this was where people picked up dinner, caught up with neighbors, exchanged local news, and found comfort in the steady rhythm of Midwestern life. It wasn't flashy or modern. It was dependable, as familiar as snow-covered roads every winter. Then the price war arrived, and Carter's never stood a real chance. When Walmart expanded aggressively into Michigan, it brought a low-price, large-scale model refined down to the smallest detail. Overnight, every local grocery chain was forced into survival mode. But that was only the first hit. The second blow proved fatal. Meijer, Michigan's own retail giant, began rapidly expanding its 24-hour supercenters, combining groceries, household goods, and pharmacies into a single, all-in-one destination. Convenience, scale, and pricing all converged in ways Carter's couldn't match. On price, Carter's fell behind. On scale, it couldn't compete. On inventory speed, it lost even more ground. A regional chain with only a few dozen locations simply couldn't stand up to 2 retail giants backed by modern logistics networks, massive distribution centers, and virtually unlimited capital. With grocery margins already razor-thin, the pressure became unbearable. Carter's Foods eventually filed for bankruptcy, but the damage extended far beyond the company itself. In many towns across northern Michigan, Carter's had been the final grocery store within dozens of miles. Once it closed, older residents were forced to travel much farther for basic necessities. Low-income families lost access to affordable food. Communities lost a trusted gathering place, an anchor that had quietly held everything together. And the question that still lingers continues to trouble many people today. Could Carter's have survived if Michigan hadn't become a battlefield between Walmart and Meijer? Number 1. Fairway Market of New York. In New York City, some stores do more than sell groceries. They embody the personality of the city itself. For more than 80 years, Fairway Market was one of those places. It didn't rely on flashy ads or national branding. Its identity came from experience. The smell of coffee beans roasted right in the store, towers of imported cheeses, long, impatient lines of New Yorkers packed shoulder to shoulder at the deli counter. Fairway felt unmistakably New York, something no national supermarket chain could ever manufacture. But Fairway's downfall came from a familiar mistake, allowing Wall Street to take control of a brand that was never meant to be run like a financial instrument. Beginning around 2010, investment firms pushed Fairway into rapid expansion. The chain jumped from 5 locations to 15 in a short period of time. Costs exploded. Debt climbed past $300 million. Instead of strengthening the business, each new store added another financial burden. Then the market shifted again. When Amazon acquired Whole Foods in 2017, grocery retail entered a new era of price wars and delivery competition. Fairway had neither the scale nor the capital to survive that fight. The pressure was relentless. In 2016, Fairway filed for bankruptcy for the first time. 4 years later, it filed again. Beloved locations on the Upper West Side, in Harlem and in Red Hook, vanished almost overnight. What New Yorkers lost wasn't just a place to buy food. They lost a piece of the city's tempo, a familiar rhythm woven into daily life. And that leaves the audience with an uncomfortable question. If a grocery chain as deeply tied to New York's identity as Fairway couldn't survive, what chance do other local brands really have? You've just seen 10 grocery chains that once fed millions of Americans disappear within a single decade. But the most alarming part isn't the names that vanished. It's what replaced them. Longer drives, higher prices, and communities, especially people over 50, left to navigate an America changing faster than they ever expected. This disappearance isn't history. It's happening right now, as you're watching this. And it will continue in the years ahead. If you want to keep following what comes next, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of a landscape that's quietly transforming in real time.